Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Pick and Pay. My 5-year-old daughter Erin was asked by one of her friends at school the other day, I happened to be in earshot, "Erin, there's your daddy, what does he do?" She thought about this for a second and she gave two answers. She said, "My daddy has a TV show and people send him lots of wine." Now the first part she knows quite well because she often comes through to join the studio audience for Dan Nichol's show on Supersport. The wine part refers to the fact that pretty much on a daily basis there's some wine arriving from somewhere around the world, mostly South Africa, either from an estate or from a PR agency or by somebody who's just found something they want to send my way and get some thoughts on it. Now I'm most appreciative because it adds to the diversity of wine that I'm able to sample and to discuss and to taste, and by and large it's a really rewarding experience. Some of it I like more than others, some suits my palate more than others, but it just constructs a greater view of the South African wine landscape. And so tasting that wine, usually with a fair amount of help from my wife, is a real joy in terms of what I get to do. And the 4 wines I have for you this week are wines that have all arrived in the last week or two. They're all fairly new releases, and so while they're a little on the younger side, they're all wines I'm looking forward to trying, particularly because a couple of them are wines I've not come across at all before, and that makes me particularly excited. But the first of those is one that I know fairly well. It is a Chenin Blanc from an estate called Bellingham. Now, when I grew up, a wine that my parents would drink quite a lot of, growing up in rural Zimbabwe, where wine wasn't easily accessible above a certain level, was the Bellingham Johannesburger, that old classic green bottle. It was an icon in terms of South African wine marketing, and it's found its way over the Limpopo and up into rural Zimbabwe on a fairly regular basis. So the Bellingham Johannesburger, one I know well, but there's plenty more to Bellingham. And this in particular is one I know that the Bellingham team are very proud of, not just the wine itself, but this range. Now this is the Bernard range. Who is Bernard? Bernard is, or was, Bernard Podlaszczuk, and I hope for my Polish fans I've got that right. Bernard Podlaszczuk grew up in England, but of Polish roots, got injured during World War II, moved out to the Cape with his wife Frida, and with the help of a dozen or so Italian prisoners of war, they purchased Bellingham, turned it around, and kick-started what is now one of the better-known wine estates and wine producers in South Africa. And together, Bernard and Frida gave rise to an estate that now gives us this particular wine, the Bernard Series. And before I even try the wine, important to note there, wine of origin, Cape Town. That is a fairly new addition. Only in the last year or so, wines mostly in the Cape Town area, sort of Constantia and a little further south, can call themselves wine of origin Cape Town, but it also extends up to the Durbanville area and the lower reaches of Stellenbosch, and Bellingham falls within the appropriate realm. So wine of origin Cape Town, how much impact will that have on the market? Well, if it's done right, if it's sold right, I think it could well, because although the wine world knows Stellenbosch, the broader world knows Cape Town, and this could have an impact on the international market. That is to be seen in due course. To be seen now, though, is how this old bush vine goes. Chenin Blanc and old bush vine, rock stars in terms of South African wine at the moment. Those older vines producing really intense and measured grapes that are giving us some delightful Sauvignon Blanc, a luscious wine that if you've watched more than 3 minutes of Dan Really Likes Wine, you'll know I'm pretty fond of. Now, this was delivered by Andrew Harris, good friend of mine. He's a semi-professional mountain climber and rock climber and spends most of his free time bombarding Instagram with posts from dizzying heights. But when he's not scaling mountains and leaping about like a rabbit, he is sending wine out around the world. He was with the Annie Else Group, I think he was with Rickety Bridge before that, but he's now looking after, amongst other labels, the Bellingham brand, in particular the Bernard Series. So he sent it up. And he sent it up with a little note suggesting that he thought this was one I might like. And he knows my palate well, so I've got a sneaking suspicion he might just be right. A little bit of straw to that, lovely golden colour. Very, very rich. Ah. I do feel like I repeat myself sometimes when it comes to Chenin Blanc because there are very similar responses that come to mind. That intensity of the grape, the fact that it's got the creaminess but without losing the citrus, and the really good Chenins for me, and this is certainly one of them, have that sense of balance, but there's so much to it. There's nothing reserved about the wine. It really comes at you openly and happily and cheerfully, and gives you not just a wine that's drinking really nicely now, but is drinking really, really nicely with time to come, if it's anything to go by for now. Because that's where Chenin, I think, has so much value, not just to drink immediately, but to give it a little more time. I was in the new Pick and Pay it on Nickel that opened last week. They've got some L'Avenir Chenin Blanc from 2006 from the Nederburg auction that's on sale. It's not inexpensive, but buy yourself a bottle of that, and I think you'll find a real treat. And while this is a treat already, it's got some potential to go a good few years from here. But already, the colour's lovely, the nose is rich and intense, and already I'm thinking, hang on to the rest of this bottle, quick phone call, Uber Eats, send through a nice butter chicken curry or similar, and I've got a pretty good combination. Right, so just the one white wine for today, a white wine that has a shelf life of, well, as long as it takes for that butter chicken curry to arrive. Then on to three reds, and this is the first of the two that I'd never come across before. This comes from a place, the name of which I had to make a phone call just to get right. Pete Goff-Wood, the chef, really good friend of mine. You'll know him from assorted television shows, from MasterChef, from Brymaster. He was part of the team that set up the restaurant here at Bosjes, the Dutch word for small bushes. And Bosjes is a lovely spot. It's in a delightful part of the Brederkloof Valley. You look up to some beautiful hills, rolling terrain, nice glass doors around an excellent little restaurant. Beautiful mosaic as well, if you happen to get out there, look out for that. But up until recently, the star attraction has been their chapel. It's small, it's intimate, it's perfect for a wedding that's not too big, maybe your second or third one, and it is a chapel that's won all manner of design and architectural awards. And until recently, that was the extent of it, but they've now added some wine. Alan Mullins has looked at the area and he's come up with two wines. There is a Chardonnay from the area, and then there is this 2016 Reserve Shiraz, drawn from the local vineyard. Just had a look at what he felt was a really, really good area for Shiraz, picked some of the best grapes, and created wines that, by and large, unless you know someone who knows someone, are only available if you actually head out to Bosjes. How did I get hold of them? Well, my friend Ian Manley kindly sent a bottle my way, and so I'm very happily going to taste it without getting down to the Brederkloof Valley. Oh, that's a lovely, lovely colour. Now, I say without getting down to the Brederkloof Valley, it's not because I don't want to. I love the area, and I also think the Brederkloof Valley is probably the most underrated wine area in South Africa at the moment. The wines aren't terribly expensive, but the quality is generally good to exceptional, and the people who make wine in the Brederkloof Valley are just lovely people. They're good, honest, blue-collar winemakers who could probably sell their wine for a lot more than they do, but they're happy where they are, they're happy producing what they do. Chenin Blanc does tend to headline a lot of the production, but it goes well beyond that, and as I'm about to find out, they also produce some Shiraz. That's a nice juxtaposition. There's, oh, dare I say, even something fambossy about that, kind of licoricey spice to it, and the spice is definitely there. Shiraz, it's very easy to nod knowingly and say, so lots of spice to that, because that's what you expect in Shiraz, but it certainly is there, but it's not a heavy spice, it's not a heavy wine. There's quite a lightness to this. I think these grapes were taken from a little higher up, and there's beyond the spice, there's a nice softness to this, a nice delicate touch. So the combinations come together really, really well. I'm trying to think back to what I ate at Bosjes. It was a few years ago. I was on the Cape Epic when I dropped by for my sole visit, but I've got no doubt there are a couple of dishes. There was a little bit of a Cape Malay feel to one or two of them, if I remember correctly, and if that's still the case, then this is something that could play off those very nicely indeed. So on to red number 2, and on to wine number 2 that I haven't had before. This is the Mentors range from KWV, and it's had quite an impact over the last few years. KWV has made a vast amount of wine for a very long time now, And as a group, KWV has a whole range of labels. You'll know their Cathedral Cellar, they've got the Classic Collection, there's Rudeberg, Laborie, Pearly Bay, Bonne Espérance, Golden Khan. They've got rather a lot of wine. There's the Cafe Culture range, which I've only ever drunk once at a wedding in Turku on the west coast of Finland. What it was doing there, I'm not sure, but we thoroughly enjoyed it that evening. But this one is probably the top of the range that KWV do now. Their Mentors range has a number of different wines. I've had the Chenin in the past, and I've had the Sauvignon Blanc. I haven't had this one though, the Canvas. Before I tell you what the Canvas is though, the Mentors, well, that refers to two things. One, the general idea of people mentoring and passing on knowledge, passing on heritage, passing on tradition and history, but also a mentor in particular. Abraham Parol, the father of Pinotage, the man who merged the grapes famously in Stellenbosch almost 100 years ago now, and gave us the grape we now claim as our very own here in South Africa. And this, in a sense, is a tribute to him and the impact that he had on the South African wine community as a whole. And it's a really upmarket look. You might not be able to see, but the pronounced feel and touch on the label, it's very minimalist, it's very polished, it looks really good. I'm also interested in looking at the back of a bottle of wine, because quite frequently you'll see some importer details, which tells you that a lot of the wine with the same label has gone abroad. In this case, it has been imported by Eggers and Franke Holding in Germany. So there are Germans happily drinking, happily I'm sure, the Mentors Canvas. And they'll be drinking a wine that is largely Shiraz. It's 64-65% Shiraz, this particular red blend. There's a healthy dose of Mourvèdre in there, some Grenache Noir, and then just a little seam of Cinsault, just to put a touch of smoothness to everything and polish it all off. Still fairly young, it's a 2017, so again this one has just come out. So my first taste of it to see how the Mentors Canvas goes for me. So the whole Mentors range is overseen by Iselle van Blerk and her team. I'm not sure if Iselle is related to my friend Bock van Blerk, the musician, who once played a very cruel, but in retrospect extremely funny, practical joke on me with Roland Schoeman, the Olympic swimmer, but it's not one that's really suitable for this particular audience. Instead, I'll stick to Iselle's wine, which has a deeply rich, plummy colour to it. A slight smokiness, almost a kind of burnt matchstick aroma. And a very, very nice balance to it. It's an interesting blend, that, bringing those all together, and I definitely think it works. It is nice. There's a little tiny bit of sharpness to it, but that's going to go over the next year or two. And given both the nature of the wine, it's a high-end wine, and given the nature of the grapes in there, you'd want to take this and give it at least another year or two, I'm sure, to get the very best out of it. Certainly pleasant now, but definitely got a little bit more time on it. And I suspect Iselle might agree with me that it's good now, but its best is still to come. I think that'll be a pretty good best when it does. So first taste ever of the Mentors Canvas. So far so good. And from two unknowns to the considerably more familiar. There is a wonderful sense of majesty to this bottle. It is a very heavy one indeed. It has the collection of bottles we've had over the years that would work beautifully as a murder weapon in a wine-themed thriller series or movie. This is the Warwick Trilogy, and my relationship with Warwick revolves principally around, let me make sure I get this exactly right, the 20th of November 2011, which was the day after I got married. We got married, my wife and I, at Backsburg, and then moved down the road to Warwick for a picnic the day afterwards before setting off to Vietnam on a wonderful, wonderful honeymoon. And I'd spent a bit of time at Warwick before. I'd certainly drunk plenty of their wine, but it made Warwick a particularly special place for both me and my wife, and I kept a close eye on and drank a fair amount of the wine since then. At the time of our marriage, it was the Ratcliffe family who owned it. They've since parted ways with Warwick. A couple of Americans have now moved in, and continuing the tradition with a star team of winemakers producing some really good wine. And this trilogy is one of the wines that really stands out. It's not an inexpensive bottle of wine. This is probably about 450 rand if you're buying it from the cellar. Getting in a restaurant, don't expect to get much change from 1,000 rand or so. but there's a reason for that. It is an exceptionally made wine. It's a wine that for a long time was Cabernet Sauvignon led. The 2015 trilogy moved back to being Cabernet Franc-led, and this one is just over 50% Cab Franc, about a third Cab Sauv, and the last little bit is some Merlot. So it's a reasonably classic blend, and I like the fact that it's led by Cabernet Franc, because I think Warwick do some really good things with Cab Franc. They made some great Cab Franc over the years. I've always really enjoyed it. That lovely red wine with the slight bit of pepper and those nice green notes. It's a grape we're seeing have a little bit of a cult resurgence in South Africa, and Warwick were part of that story in terms of getting it back on track. But the Cab Franc now playing a chief role inside this Trilogy 2016, which I think was only released in about the last week or so. Now you can't pour too big a glass of this because you just can't hold the bottle up for long enough to do it. So that gives me the perfect tasting amount. That's a lovely, deep, rich red to this. That sort of black currant colour, or a really, really, really badly burnt English tourist on holiday in South Africa. Quite a subtle bouquet, giving way to a very, very strong wine indeed. That Cab Franc noticeably leading the blend. Nice bit of smoke to it. Still slightly tannic, not dissimilar to the previous red that we had, that Canvas. So wine that you know has got a long time, and I suggest that if that Canvas, the Mentors from KWV, has got time to go, then this has got even longer. This really is one to cellar, particularly at that sort of price. You want to invest in a case, put it away somewhere, and the next 5-10 years, bring them out sporadically, really for no more than one other person, because you don't want to have to share it with too many people. But it's continuing a tradition of not just fine winemaking at Warwick, but this particular blend being a flagship of a very established and very successful estate. And although the ownership has changed, the approach is clearly still there, the making of fine wine is clearly still there, and the fact that the Trilogy remains one of Stellenbosch's better known and more celebrated blends clearly hasn't ended with the 2016. If you like your Cabernet Franc, then this is going to be a lovely, lovely red blend for you. It takes the lead, it's not completely, you can pick up there's something else in there, and in this case it is that Cab Sauv and that Merlot, but the symphony is really nice, and together it's another big tick in that long list of Warwick Trilogies over the years. So there we go. I've got a Chenin Blanc to go and polish off with that butter chicken as soon as Uber Eats arrive. Some very interesting reds. The Bosjes enjoyed it, but it also reminded me that I need to get back down to the Breda Club Valley and spend some time there, because I do thoroughly enjoy it. The Mentors showing that KWV taking the top end of their offering very, very seriously indeed. And the Warwick Trilogy, just a reminder of where Warwick is. So 4 new wines coming in, and as my daughter will now be able to tell her friends, Daddy doesn't just receive wine and have it delivered to the house, but he's pretty good at tasting it as well. Cheers.